Hello everybody. I'm trying to set up this for you. And how are you doing? That's great. Our instructor, Miss Mueller, really miss you a lot. You brought so much love and levity to these proceedings. So, I'm going to start off with, I call my speech Three Blind Mice, or the Russians' Three Stooges of Foreign Policy. Vladimir Putin takes advice from three distinct groups of foreign policy ideologists who could be labeled warriors, merchants, and pious believers. Each of them serves a role in how Russia should be developed. The president deliberately privileges one over another and tries to keep their input open. He is constantly lobbied with dossiers full of proposals and ideas and uses them tactfully. Now, Novaya Gazeta, which is a newspaper reporter, caused a stir early in the 2017s when it published a memorandum with a scenario for the annexation of Crimea, and it's been alleged produced to the Kremlin in early 2014. It would be wrong to take this as proof, however, of a long-term Kremlin plan to seize Crimean Peninsula. It is much more likely that Crimea operation was a last-minute improvisational effort that drew on a contingency plan. Putin simply pulled the relevant dossier off his shelf and put it into action. Currently, the warriors enjoy the most favor with the Kremlin. You know, he was part of it himself at one time. They consist not only of officials of the Defense Ministry and the Counterintelligence Agency, but also men outside of the security sector who can be described as hawks, such as parliamentary speakers, Sergei Narishkin, Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin, and Presidential Advisor Sergei Glaziev. Pretty much anyone who stands to earn money and privilege if Russia follows an isolationist course and can be called a warrior. So you don't need much to be called a warrior. It could not correct to call them a party of war. They are a desperate collection of public figures united by an interest of confrontation. Who knows what worse things can get in the West the stronger they become. These warriors would be willing to bring their children home from schools in the West, close their foreign bank accounts, sell their dacha, as the world strengthens this position with Russia. They are willing to give all. But now, let's talk about the merchants. The merchants are most in tune with the ambiguous line currently pursued by the Russian state, seeking neither war nor peace, and the maximum possible room for maneuver. Even Putin's current aggressive stance still leaves the door open to a possible U-turn in which the Kremlin seeks reconciliation with the West. Praise democracy and Western values. The merchants are mostly businessmen in the 2000s. State sector businessmen have been hurt by Western sanctions and as a result become more reliant on the favor of Putin provides. Those in the private sector have suffered less, but are minimized by the attacks of giving full support to the Kremlin. The merchant oppose confrontation with the West and want sanctions to be lifted as quickly as possible. Ronev, the CEO, Igor Sheshin, has complained about the falling capitalization of his company. Gennady Timchenko has redistributed his assets in order to minimize losses. According to oligarch Oleg Dovspassky, we need to work for a de-escalation of tension with the U.S. and with Europe. Potanin and Deripaska remain completely loyal to Putin, accepting his 90% approval rating will not change. But they are afraid that sanctions will stretch into the long term. Now, we can't leave Europe and the U.S., and they can't leave us, said Potanin, for the West is a difficult partner. But a partner nonetheless, but difficult. Even though the warriors and the merchants both back Putin, they differ strongly on the domestic Russian policy. Veteran market reformer Anatoly Shubayas keeps up with the dialogue with opposition leader Alexei Navalny, whom much of the establishment would like to see behind bars. Potanin calls telecommunication magnate Dmitry Zenin a real patriot, just as a television documentary on NTV labels him an agent of the U.S. State Department. An agent, nonetheless an agent. The third group is the pious believers. They make the loudest noise, but they have a smaller influence. It consists of Orthodox Church, zealous parliamentarians, propagandists, religious activists, and warmongering is their sacred duty. Social aggression and hatred is their raison d'etre, and a useful, practical tool for the Kremlin. The believers give, and listen to this is important. The believers give the regime a solid base in society. The ideology of the new Putinism rests on traditional values, religious faith, and contempt for Western lifestyle and civilization. The stock of the believers is highest when the West attack Russia, when Russia's enemy twists Putin's arm and trample on his national interests. The more enemy Russia has, the greater their freedom of action, their budgets, and their career potential. But unlike the warriors and the believers, they want the West to stay accessible so that they could wage ideological combat there. A harsher confrontation with the West could make redundant of the army of spin doctors who are currently fighting propaganda battles in the decadent West. I like to conclude that Putin resides over and above all three different conglomerates. He views them as actors in a play. He knows well that the warriors, they're a powerful, powerful resource. Very powerful. He also knows that the merchants are subject with certain political potential. And the believers are the Greek chorus who makes threatening noises. In Putin's mind, all of them can coexist. However, it is unlikely that the warriors and the merchants will always agree on the limited roles assigned to them. The warriors want a party. The merchants are fed up with the new trends and aspire to play a more long-term political role. So Putin's biggest dilemma is whether if he want to fight or do he want to do business. And finally, the religious only persuades the Russian people with a religious fallacy to look down on any other opposing nation state. All three are running around trying to persuade Putin which, that reminds me of Three Blind Mice. See how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife who chopped their heads off with a carving knife. Or better yet, They remind me of the Three Stooges. Wah 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 wah. See, I told you that I wouldn't add comedy to it, but I can't help myself. It's part of me. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that we know who basically really runs Russia and how we can get around it. Thank you very much.